Absence has always been dangerous in a world built on proximity. When Electra leaves for a long business trip, she believes she is protecting her future, strengthening her career, securing stability, proving to herself and to others that she is capable of independence without sacrificing love. She does not see her departure as abandonment. She frames it as trust. Trust in Will Spencer. Trust in boundaries. Trust in the belief that love, once declared, can withstand distance without erosion. Yet absence does not freeze time. It stretches it, and in that stretch, emotions find space to breathe, to wander, and sometimes to betray. For Will, Electra's departure introduces a silence he did not anticipate. The house does not feel freer, it feels hollow. Routine collapses without warning, and into that hollow space steps Dylan. At first, her presence is practical, even comforting. Conversations fill the quiet. Shared meals replace solitary ones. Laughter becomes an unexpected relief rather than a transgression. Will convinces himself that companionship is not betrayal, that closeness is not intimacy, that he remains loyal as long as he does not cross an invisible line he believes he can clearly see. What he does not realize is that lines erode long before they are crossed. Dylan, too, begins from a place of innocence. Or at least, from a place she convinces herself is innocent. She has always been careful with Will, mindful of Electra's position, respectful of the relationship that defines the boundaries she swore not to test. Yet Electra's absence transforms caution into opportunity, not deliberately, but gradually. The intimacy that grows between Dylan and Will does not announce itself with desire. It begins with understanding, with the comfort of being seen without explanation, with moments that feel safe because they are quiet, familiar, and unobserved. Dylan tells herself that what she feels is companionship shaped by circumstance. Will tells himself the same lie. As days stretch into weeks, the emotional architecture between them shifts. They begin to anticipate each other's presence. Silence becomes shared rather than awkward. Touch appears casually, hands brushing, shoulders leaning, moments lingering just a second too long. Neither speaks of it because naming something gives it weight, and weight demands consequence. What neither of them fully acknowledges is that intimacy does not require intention. It requires only permission, and they have given it without realizing. The moment Dylan discovers she is pregnant does not arrive with drama. It arrives with disbelief. A quiet calculation of dates. A tightening in her chest that refuses to loosen. The realization lands slowly, then all at once, stealing her breath and rearranging her sense of self. Panic does not strike immediately. Instead, confusion takes hold. Confusion about the future, about responsibility, about the moral implications of what she has allowed to happen without fully consenting to its consequences. The child growing inside her becomes both a symbol of creation and of irreversible truth. Dylan's internal struggle intensifies as she confronts the impossible question of disclosure. Telling Will means detonating the fragile structure holding their lives together. Keeping the truth hidden means carrying the weight alone, allowing fear to define her decisions. She vacillates between these extremes, rehearsing conversations that never happen, imagining outcomes that paralyze her. She does not know whether Will see the pregnancy as responsibility, punishment, or betrayal. She does know that once spoken, the truth cannot be reshaped. When Electra finally returns, she does not immediately accuse. She observes. The shift in Will is subtle but unmistakable. He is distracted, guarded, almost overly attentive in a way that feels performative. Dylan, once relaxed in her presence, now appears restrained, as though constantly measuring her words. Electra senses distance not as absence but as displacement. She feels herself standing where someone else has already been. Suspicion does not erupt in Electra, it sharpens. She begins to investigate not out of jealousy but out of instinct. Patterns emerge where she once saw coincidence. Shared glances that end too quickly. Conversations that halt upon her arrival. Attention she cannot define but cannot ignore. Electra's investigation is quiet, methodical, driven by the need to know whether her intuition is betraying her or warning her. What she uncovers is not proof of a single act, but evidence of emotional proximity. And that discovery wounds her more deeply than any physical betrayal might have. Under the pressure of Electra's scrutiny and the growing weight of her secret, Dylan reaches a breaking point. The pregnancy is no longer something she can compartmentalize. It demands acknowledgement, clarity, and decision. When she finally tells Will, the confession fractures him. Shock registers first, followed by disbelief, then a cascade of fear and responsibility he is not prepared to navigate. Fatherhood is not an abstract concept, it is a reckoning. It forces Will to confront not only the consequences of his actions, but the truth of his feelings, his failures, and his inability to remain neutral when neutrality was required. The revelation does not remain contained. News of Dylan's pregnancy spreads, as secrets always do, propelled by whispers, assumptions, and emotional fallout. The fragile foundation of Will and Elektra's marriage collapses under the weight of betrayal and public exposure. Elektra is not merely heartbroken, she is destabilized. The life she believed she was building dissolves into something unrecognizable. Trust, once broken, does not fracture cleanly. It splinters, leaving jagged edges that cut long after the moment of impact. Will stands at the center of the wreckage, facing responsibilities that cannot be deferred. Fatherhood demands presence, accountability, and sacrifice. Love demands honesty, and honesty now carries devastating cost. He must navigate guilt toward Elektra, obligation toward Dylan, and fear for the child whose existence rewrites every plan he once made. Will's struggle is not simply romantic, it is existential. He must decide who he is when desire, duty, and consequence collide. Dylan, meanwhile, grapples with a different kind of isolation. Pregnancy transforms her body and her future, but it does not grant clarity. She is neither villain nor victim. She is a woman confronting the aftermath of emotional choices she did not fully understand until it was too late. Her fear is not only about raising a child, but about raising one born of complexity, conflict, and broken trust. By the time the dust begins to settle, nothing resembles what came before. Elektra's certainty is gone. Will's identity is fractured. Dylan's future is bound to a truth she can no longer escape. What began as absence has become consequence. What felt like intimacy has become obligation. And what was once love has transformed into something far more complicated, far more painful, and far more permanent. In the end, The Bold and the Beautiful reminds us that betrayal rarely begins with intention. It begins with proximity, silence, and the belief that we can control outcomes we have already set in motion. And when responsibility arrives, it does not ask whether we are ready. It only asks whether we will face it. If part 1 was the slow collapse of certainty, part 2 is the aftermath. The moment when consequences stop whispering and begin to speak aloud, unavoidably, to everyone involved. The revelation of Dylan's pregnancy does not simply change relationships, it rewrites identities. Nothing returns to what it was, because nothing was ever as stable as it appeared. For Will, the days following Dylan's confession blur into a single, suffocating stretch of reckoning. Sleep becomes fragmented, thought loops endlessly, and every familiar space feels newly hostile. Fatherhood no longer exists as a distant possibility or an abstract responsibility. It has weight now, shape, consequence. Will begins to understand that neutrality is no longer an option, that every choice he makes will wound someone, including himself. He feels the sharp sting of guilt toward Elektra, whose trust he did not merely violate but dismantled piece by piece. At the same time, he feels an inescapable pull toward the unborn child, a responsibility that does not ask whether he is emotionally prepared, only whether he will show up. What haunts Will most is not the pregnancy itself, but the realization that his emotional betrayal preceded the physical one. In confronting Dylan's truth, he is forced to confront his own. He cannot honestly claim that what happened was an accident. It was a series of decisions, each small enough to justify in isolation, yet devastating in accumulation. The intimacy he shared with Dylan did not erupt, it unfolded. And now, unfolding has given way to exposure. Dylan, meanwhile, exists in a constant state of dual awareness. Her body moves forward biologically, indifferent to moral turmoil, while her mind circles fear, regret, and determination in equal measure. Pregnancy alters her not only physically but ethically. She is no longer deciding only for herself. The child becomes a silent presence in every thought, forcing Dylan to reassess her values, her strength, and her capacity for honesty. She wonders whether she is strong enough to be seen fully, not just as a woman who made a mistake, but as a mother whose child will forever be linked to a broken union. Her fear of judgment is not abstract. She knows how quickly narratives form, how mercilessly women are reduced to cautionary tales. She senses that no matter how complex the truth is, it will be simplified into blame. Yet beneath the fear lies something steadier, resolve. Dylan begins to understand that secrecy has already cost her enough. She refuses to let silence define her future the way it nearly destroyed her present. Elektra's unraveling is quieter, but no less devastating. Betrayal, for her, is not explosive, it is disorienting. She replays moments she once trusted, searching for signs she dismissed too easily. The marriage she believed was built on mutual respect now feels like a carefully maintained illusion. What hurts most is not simply Will's closeness to Dylan, but the realization that she was absent at the exact moment her presence mattered most. The question that torments her is not, why did this happen? But when did I stop being enough? Electra's investigation had prepared her for the possibility of betrayal, but it had not prepared her for its permanence. The pregnancy ensures that there will be no clean break, no decisive ending that allows her to grieve and move on. Dylan will always exist in Will's life now, not as a rival but as a co-parent. The child will become a living reminder of a moment when Electra was replaced. Not physically, but emotionally. This truth reshapes her pain into something sharper than heartbreak, displacement. As news spreads, the community responds not with empathy but fascination. Whispers move faster than facts, reshaping the narrative into something more scandalous than human. Will becomes a symbol of moral failure. Dylan becomes a cautionary figure. Electra becomes the betrayed wife whose dignity is scrutinized for cracks. None of them are allowed the luxury of complexity. Each is flattened into a role that feels both inaccurate and inescapable. Will attempts to step into responsibility with sincerity, but sincerity does not undo damage. He offers support to Dylan, but every gesture is complicated by the knowledge that his presence wounds Electra further. He attempts to speak honestly with Electra, but honesty arrives too late to feel redemptive. Words meant to explain only reopen wounds. Apologies feel inadequate because they are. Will begins to understand that accountability is not about saying the right thing. It is about living with the outcome without asking for forgiveness he has not earned. Dylan's transformation accelerates under pressure. Pregnancy strips away pretense. She stops apologizing for existing and begins focusing on survival, not just hers but her child's. This insistence surprises Will, who realizes that Dylan is no longer the woman who quietly adapted to circumstances. Motherhood, even before birth, has altered her priorities. She will no longer accept ambiguity as comfort. Electra, watching this shift from a distance she did not choose, confronts her own reckoning. She recognizes that staying in a marriage defined by betrayal would require a kind of self-erasure. She is unwilling to perform. Her grief evolves into resolve, not loud or dramatic but immovable. She begins to imagine a future that does not include Will, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. The idea terrifies her, yet it also offers a strange sense of relief. Letting go may be the only way to reclaim herself. As the dust continues to settle, the reality becomes unavoidable. This is no longer a story about infidelity alone. It is a story about accountability, about how quickly emotional negligence becomes irreversible harm, and about how love, when tested by consequence, reveals its true shape. Will must learn to be a father without expecting absolution. Dylan must learn to be a mother without internalizing shame. Electra must learn to be whole again without the man she trusted most. The tragedy is not that love failed. The tragedy is that it failed quietly, unnoticed, until its absence was irreversible. And as each of them stands at the edge of a future they did not plan, one truth echoes relentlessly through their lives. Some mistakes do not ask for forgiveness. They ask for transformation.